Europe's heat emergency just entered a dangerous new phase. And this isn't the same heat wave you've already heard about from earlier this summer. This is now the third major heat surge to hit the continent in 2026. And health officials are warning it could get worse before it gets better. Let's break down exactly what's happening right now, what the numbers already show, and why the World Health Organization itself has called this a health emergency. Let's start with where things actually stand today. A fresh heat dome has reloaded over Western Europe, and the Iberian Peninsula is back in the low to mid-40s Celsius. Portugal and southern Spain have been forecast to reach as high as 43 degrees Celsius this week, while France and the Benelux countries are bracing for another heat surge right behind it. This is happening at the same time parts of Central Asia are baking under 40-degree heat of their own, meaning this isn't an isolated European weather event. It's part of a much broader pattern of extreme heat, stretching across an enormous swath of the globe simultaneously. Here's why officials are treating this third wave with so much seriousness. This has not been a single heat wave slowly fading out over the summer. It's been a repeating pattern of escalating heat events since late May. The first major heat wave of the year began on May 22nd, and it was historic from the very start, producing temperatures 10 to 15 degrees Celsius above normal and breaking all-time springtime temperatures. Temperature records across Spain, the United Kingdom, Germany, France, and Ireland. That opening wave alone was directly tied to 11 deaths. Then came a second, even more severe event in June, which turned into what meteorologists are now calling the most severe heat wave on record for the continent. Let's talk about that June event specifically, because the numbers coming out of it are genuinely staggering, and they're the reason this current third wave is being watched so closely. That heat wave was driven by what meteorologists call an omega block, a weather pattern named for the shape it forms in the atmosphere, where hot, dry air from North Africa becomes wrapped in place because low-pressure systems on either side prevent it from moving away. That pattern pushed temperatures up to 18 degrees Celsius above their seasonal average in parts of the continent. Spain and Portugal pushed toward 44 degrees Celsius, with readings of 42.7 degrees recorded at both Pinhão in Portugal and Andujar in Spain on June 21st, the highest readings of that entire event. Spain would later peak even higher, hitting 45.1 degrees Celsius. Germany recorded a provisional national record of 41.7 degrees Celsius. France put 49 of its 96 mainland departments under its highest possible heat alert and shut down or shortened hours at hundreds of schools. The United Kingdom broke its all-time June temperature record, reaching around 38 degrees Celsius, surpassing a mark that had stood since 1976. Now here's the number that should really stop you. As mortality data has continued to firm up in the weeks since, France alone recorded 2,025 excess deaths in just the week between June 22nd and June 28th, representing a 30% jump in overall mortality net. Ionally, and a 62% jump specifically in the Paris region. Belgium recorded roughly 1,200 excess deaths over that same stretch, and the Netherlands recorded around 480. Those three countries alone account for more than 3,700 excess deaths from a single heatwave episode. Spain reported more than 100 heat-related deaths of its own during this period, and France linked additional deaths to the heat as well, including a number of drownings as people sought relief in rivers, lakes, and the sea, a tragic but common secondary death toll that accompanies extreme heat events as people take dangerous risks trying to cool off. As these episodes have stacked up across late June and into July, the running estimated death toll across the entire continent has climbed above 9,900, according to early attribution and excess mortality modeling. It's worth being precise about what that number represents. This is drawn from early statistical estimates rather than a final confirmed count. And like every heatwave death toll in modern record keeping, it will almost certainly be revised upward in the months ahead as more complete mortality data becomes available. But even as a preliminary estimate, a number approaching 10,000 deaths from a heat event that many people outside the affected countries may have already stopped actively following. In the news cycle is a staggering figure, and it's exactly why the World Health Organization escalated its language around this event so sharply. Let's talk about what the WHO itself has actually said, because their language here has been unusually direct for an international health body. WHO Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus stated plainly that Europe is the fastest warming continent on Earth, warming at only twice the global average rate. He specifically noted that heat waves like the one Europe has been experiencing are now about 30 times more likely to occur than they were in the pre-climate change era, and that an exceptional heat wave of this scale would previously have been considered a once-in-300-year event, but is now occurring more often than once per decade. That's not rhetorical framing. That's WHO leadership explicitly stating that what used to be considered an almost unthinkable generational weather extreme has become a recurring, expected feature of the European climate within the span of a single human lifetime. The WHO has gone further than just describing the current event, too. In a statement issued earlier this month, the organization warned that more deadly weeks may still lie ahead for the European region, describing the current heat waves as, in their words, a dress rehearsal for what's still to come, and specifically calling on European countries to plan for heat the same way they plan for seasonal winter flu outbreaks, as a recurring, predictable public health threat, requiring dedicated infrastructure and response planning, rather than an occasional emergency. The WHO has also cited a broader statistic where that heat has killed an estimated 200,000 people across Europe over the past 4 years alone. That's not a single bad summer, that's a sustained multi-year mortality event that most people outside of public health and climate circles likely have very little awareness of, precisely because heat deaths tend to be quiet, dispersed, and attributed individually to underlying health conditions rather than making headlines the way a single dramatic disaster would. Let's talk about why Europe specifically is so vulnerable to this kind of event. Because it's not simply a matter of temperature alone, it's a matter of infrastructure mismatch. Only about 20% of European homes have air conditioning installed. Much of the continent's housing stock was built over decades, sometimes centuries, specifically designed to retain heat during long, cold winters rather than to shed it during short, hot summers. That architectural mismatch, homes engineered for warmth in a climate that increasingly produces dangerous, sustained heat, is a core structural reason European heat waves have historically produced such disproportionately high death tolls compared to regions that have long been built and equipped for extreme heat as a normal seasonal condition. Let's talk about the infrastructure strain beyond housing too. Because heat doesn't just threaten people directly, it threatens the systems people depend on. Transport networks buckled during the June event, with temperatures hitting 40 degrees Celsius across Germany, the Czech Republic, and Poland simultaneously. In France, days averaging nearly 30 degrees Celsius, spiking as high as 44 degrees in one town, gave way to violent storms that followed the heat, leaving behind an estimated additional round of excess deaths tied to that transit on period alone. Power grids have also come under direct strain, with heat-related blackouts reported in Turin, Italy, and nuclear power plants in both Switzerland and France, having previously reduced output or shut down entirely during earlier heat events this year, specifically because their cooling systems rely on river water that becomes too warm to safely use once ambient temperatures climb high. Enough. That's a genuinely important detail. Heat doesn't just threaten to overwhelm hospitals and cooling centers, it can directly threaten the electricity generation systems that keep air conditioning and medical equipment running in the first place, creating a feedback loop where the exact infrastructure meant to help people survive extreme heat becomes compromised by that same heat. Now let's come back to the current moment, because this third wave building right now isn't happening in a vacuum. It's landing on a continent that's already absorbed 2 previous historically severe heat events within the same summer. Portugal and southern Spain forecast to reach 43 degrees C. Celsius this week means the Iberian Peninsula, which already recorded some of the highest temperatures anywhere on the continent back in June, is heading right back into similarly extreme territory. France and the Benelux countries bracing for another heat surge means the exact same region that recorded thousands of excess days. Aths, just weeks ago, is about to be tested again, potentially before public health systems, hospital staff, and vulnerable populations have fully recovered from the previous episode. And the fact that parts of Central Asia are simultaneously baking under 40-degree heat of their own suggests this isn't a uniquely European atmospheric anomaly. It's part of a broader hemispheric pattern of extreme heat, affecting an enormous stretch of territory at the same time. Let's talk about who's actually most at risk here, because heat deaths are rarely random. They follow predictable patterns tied to age, health status, housing conditions, and access to cooling. Elderly residents, particularly those living alone or in per-floor apartments without air conditioning, consistently represent a disproportionate share of heat-related deaths across Europe. People with existing cardiovascular or respiratory conditions face significantly elevated risk, since extreme heat places direct additional strain on the heart and lungs even in otherwise healthy adults. Outdoor workers, particularly in agriculture and construction, face direct occupational exposure risk that indoor workers largely avoid. And in a pattern that's become depressingly consistent across recent European heat events, drownings tied to people seeking relief in rivers, lakes, and coastal waters have repeatedly added to the overall death toll as a secondary, indirect consequence of the heat itself, as people take on water-related risks they might otherwise avoid in cooler conditions. Let's put this year's toll in some historical context. because it helps explain why WHO officials are using such urgent language right now. The catastrophic 2022 European heatwave season, which stretched from June through September that year, killed an estimated 70,000 people across the continent by me modeling estimates, with reported direct death tolls closer to 20,000, and caused roughly 40 billion euros in damage. The 2024 heatwave season, concentrated heavily in southern and southeastern Europe, was linked to more than 62,700 heat-related deaths, according to research published in Nature Medicine. Now, in 2026, we're watching a summer that has already produced an estimated death toll approaching 10,000 from just the first 2 waves alone, with a third wave actively building as, this is being recorded. If this year's pattern continues to track anywhere close to the trajectory of 2022 or 2024, the final toll for 2026 could end up representing one of the deadliest heat seasons in the continent's modern recorded history, and that's before accounting for whatever additional waves might still develop later in the summer beyond this current third event. Here's what actually matters for anyone in the affected regions right now, in practical terms. If you're in Spain, Portugal, France, or the Benelux countries this week, health authorities are urging people to avoid outdoor activity during peak midday hours, to follow local red and amber HOs, eat alert levels closely, and to stay especially alert to warning signs of heat stroke, which include confusion, a stopping of sweating, fainting, and very high body temperature, all of which constitute a genuine medical emergency, requiring an immediate call to emergency services. Northern Europe, including Norway, Iceland, and Finland, has so far largely escaped the worst of this particular pattern, which is worth knowing if you have any flexibility in travel plans during this window. Let's close with the bigger picture, because I think it's the most important takeaway from everything covered here. This is now the third major heat event to hit Europe within a single summer, following an already historic record-breaking June that produced thousands of excess deaths and pushed the WHO to formally describe the overall situation as a health emergency. Officials aren't calling this current wave an isolated new event. They're calling it a continuation and escalation of a pattern that's already killed an estimated 9,900 people this year alone, and part of a broader 4-year toll of roughly 200,000 heat-related deaths across the continent. The WHO's own description of this summer as a dress rehearsal is a genuinely unsettling choice of words, because it implies this isn't the worst version of what a changing climate can produce in Europe. It's a preview. And European countries are being told directly that heat now needs to be planned for with the same seriousness and infrastructure investment as a recurring seasonal disease outbreak. Watch specifically for a few things in the coming days. Watch whether Portugal and southern Spain actually reach or exceed that forecast 43-degree mark, and whether new individual station records get set the way they were during the June event. Watch whether France and the Benelux countries see anything approaching the scale of excess mortality recorded during the previous wave, since that comparison will tell health officials a great deal about whether this third event represents a genuine escalation or a somewhat less severe repeat. And watch whether additional heat domes continue building later into the summer beyond this current wave, since the pattern so far in 2026 has been one of repeated, sequential extreme heat events rather than a single peak followed by a return to normal conditions. Stay tuned for continued coverage as this develops, because Europe's heat emergency clearly isn't over, and there's a lot more still to come out of this story before the summer is finished.